both underlined and direct. Reasons for American neutrality, reasons for American entrance into World War II, aka Pearl Harbor. What are the wartime goals of the Allies and the major battles of World War II, such as D-Day, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. We're also going to take a look at the American home front, Yalta and the Potsdam conferences, their significance, and the decision to drop the atomic bomb and its lasting effects. Causes for World War II. First, the underlying causes dating back to World War I and imperialism. We're going to find the Treaty of Versailles. Remember, that's going to leave feeling of hatred and bitterness with the Germans towards the rest of the Allies. So they're going to be wanting their vengeance for how they were improperly treated after World War I. Ideas of nationalism, of course. Everyone in the world is experiencing the Great Depression. The rise of dictatorships, Europe's policy of appeasement, and American isolationism. The direct cause for World War I is Germany invading Poland on September 1st, 1939. So here's a picture of some of the German Panzer tanks as they roll into Poland on the invasion on the 1st of September. And here's just another picture of the German military preparing for war. The Axis powers. So Hitler and Nazi Germany, the rise to power as a result of the weakness of the previous government from 1933 up until Hitler becomes the chancellor. Hitler is a totalitarian ruler and is well liked and beloved for several reasons. One thing, he's a very charismatic speaker, really grabs the attention of the people with his speeches. He preached constantly about German nationalism, and he denounced the Versailles Treaty. He also finds a scapegoat for a lot of the things going wrong in Germany, and that scapegoat is the Jewish people, and the communists are both put to blame for the German problems. One of his promises that he preaches is that Germany will return back to their former glory. Here's a picture of Hitler giving one of his speeches. And again, Hitler again giving one of his speeches. Benito Mussolini is a dictator in Italy. He's a fascist leader who took control of Italy in 1922. He wanted to create another Roman Empire. He invaded Ethiopia to help begin this empire in 1935, and along with Hitler, he supported other like-minded dictators such as Francisco Franco in the Spanish Civil War. Below you see a picture of Mussolini, kind of a scary, tough-looking guy there. Japanese expansion. The Japanese sought total control of the Pacific because of the resources that are allotted there. In 1931, the Japanese take military occupation of the country of Manchuria. In 1936, Japan then signs the pact with Germany and Italy, making them allies. And in December of 1937, Japan partakes in the Nanking Massacre. Here's just a picture of Japanese imperialism. Right here you see the island of Japan, and you see as they go forth into Manchuria and how they begin to invade Asia. This is through the previous wars we've talked about, the Sino-Japanese War and the Russo-Japanese War. American neutrality. To the left here you see the president of the Great Depression and the beginning of World War II, President Roosevelt. Domestically speaking, the U.S. is in the midst of a Great Depression, just like the rest of the world is, and the U.S. public is very intent on remaining neutral, staying out of European affairs. In 1935, the U.S. creates their first Neutrality Act, which essentially says we will not get involved at all in any European affairs. We will not even sell any arms to any belligerent nations. Belligerent meaning any nation kind of looking to cause trouble, start war. However, in 1937, we changed that Neutrality Act, and we alter it in terms of the fact that we will now sell arms to nations, however, only to those nations that have cash, because they need to pay in cash. We learned from World War I that loaning people money to purchase these goods is not a very good idea, especially if they cannot pay them back. So we want cash, and they have to carry their own arms out, which means they need to take care of their own shipping to and from where these weapons need to go. FDR does warn that there's something going on here, that these nations are stocking up on all these weapons. Something big is about to happen. So he had a general idea that something bad was about to take place. But we, being the U.S., we could not pass up an opportunity to make a quick buck. Isolationism in the U.S. Would continue both economically and militarily. However, again, we were selling weapons. We did want to try to prevent mistakes, which led to our World War I involvement. One of FDR's quotes that go along with these mindsets is, let no one imagine that we will escape, that this Western hemisphere will not be attacked. This outraged a lot of the isolationists because FDR knew that at some point in time we're going to get dragged into this war, and that we should prepare for it, get ready. However, a lot of U.S. citizens felt that we should just mind our own business. The policy of appeasement is one of the biggest causes of World War II. This is the idea that the powers of Europe would essentially let Hitler and Mussolini take whatever they land that they pleased, in hopes that once they're happy with the amount of property or territory or resources that they have, that they will stop and that war will not become widespread. Some examples of how they used appeasement: in 1938, Hitler would invade Austria and take over the Sudetenland on the Czech border. In the Munich Conference of 1938 as well, Chamberlain and Daladier would allow Hitler to do this. Chamberlain's overall goal is that he wants to maintain peace in our time, while at the same time of allowing Hitler to go and kind of take whatever he wants. The British are back home, are rearming, so they have a sense of what all of this land grabbing by Hitler and Mussolini is going to lead up to. They just kind of want to make sure that they're better prepared for what is to come. War erupts. March 1939, Hitler breaks the Munich Agreement and invades the rest of Czechoslovakia. And in August 1939, Hitler signs a non-aggression pact with rival USSR and turns his attention west. Hitler has learned from the German mistakes of World War I, in that you cannot successfully fight a two-front war, especially when that eastern front of war is going to be facing the massive nation of Russia. So he's smart and creates a non-aggression pact, which essentially says that Russia, we will not attack you as Germans as long as you do not attack us. And this leads to the first official strike of the war, September 1st, 1939, the Blitzkrieg invasion of Poland, where Britain and France after this declare war on the Germans. As a part of that non-aggression pact deal, Germany does give a part of Poland to Russia as kind of a act of good faith. Here's a picture on the left of what the German Blitzkrieg involved. Again, it is a quick lightning attack by both land, sea, and air to take your enemy out as quickly as possible. World War II from 1939 to 1941, Hitler's wild ride in Europe while the U.S. stands by and watches. Hitler moves into Europe in April 1940. Hitler seizes Norway and Denmark. In May, he takes the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg. By June, Hitler controls France. This then turns the attention, this then allows Germany to turn their attention towards Great Britain. In the fall of 1940, Hitler embarks on the Battle of Britain, in which for, I believe it's about 40 days straight, London is heavily bombed by the German Luftwaffe, which is their German Air Force. However, Churchill and the Brits remain defiant. They do not surrender to Hitler's attacks. Over here on the right is a picture of the leader of Great Britain at the time, Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Kind of has the face of a bulldog a little bit, which was his nickname. The United States and Britain, again, we do have ties to Great Britain. In 1939, Roosevelt revises his Neutrality Act and allows for arms trade, especially to help out our friends Great Britain. Public opinion about this act is divided. Again, some of us believe that we need to get involved before we're dragged in. Others believe we need to mind our own business. And this leads up to the election of 1940, in which FDR wins his third presidential term, which is an unprecedented thing because most presidents only serve nowadays 2 terms. In 1940, we come up with a destroyers for bases deal, which means that if you allow us to have naval bases in your land, in your region, then we will build destroyer ships for you. In 1941, we come up with the Lend-Lease Act. So again, here's a better look at the destroyers for bases. It called for 50 American destroyers to be exchanged for the use of 8 British naval bases along the North Atlantic coast. So this is going to allow us to have a naval presence directly in Europe without having to waste time and money of churning back and forth between the Atlantic and the U.S. The Lend-Lease Act made it possible to lend or lease supplies to any country whose interests were vital to our side of the success of war. So, for instance, for Great Britain, we gave them roughly about $50 billion. The U.S. enters the war. The destroyers for bases deal will allow the U.S. to extend its influence in the war. In August of 1941, the Atlantic Charter is revised, and Churchill and FDR agreed to defend democracy, free trade, and economic advancement. The U.S. destroyer Greer would be attacked in September of 1941, and the U.S. directly now becomes in naval warfare. Although we do not have official physical troops on the ground in this war, we are again involved in naval warfare. The U.S. and Japan. Japan wanted to extend influence in the Far East, and in July of 1940, the U.S. would embargo the raw materials that we were trading back and forth with Japan because of their extensive push west towards us in the Pacific. In 1941, we would lend lease aid to China to defend themselves against the Japanese from being invaded and taken over, and we were also preparing for an attack in the Philippines as well. And December 7th, 1941, a day which will live in infamy, is when Japan would attack Pearl Harbor, and this is essentially what drags us into World War II. We will stop there for today. Until next time. Hello and welcome back to World War II. We're going to continue on with our PowerPoint lecture here. Continuing on with the United States and Japan. We're going to take a look at how Japan essentially draws us into war. Japan is wanting to extend their influence in the Far East by imperializing Manchuria, parts of China, and essentially extending westward as well. Due to this threat, in July of 1940, the U.S. is going to decide to embargo all raw materials to Japan, which essentially means we're not going to trade with them. In 1941, we're going to do the Lend-Lease Aid Act with China to help them gear up so that they can better defend themselves against the Japanese and a possible incoming invasion. At the same time, we're also anticipating an attack that the Japanese will probably do to the Philippine Islands. December 7th, 1941, Japan will officially attack Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, and this is essentially the final act that draws us into war and out of our isolationism. So here are some images of Pearl Harbor here. As you see here, you kind of see a lot of ships grouped together. Essentially what Pearl Harbor was is that we had most of our naval fleet docked in the harbor here. And so it was easy pickings for the Japanese to just come in with their bombers and destroy our ships. We were able to scramble some of our fleet to fight back, but we lost pretty much everything. Here's a good look at planes taking off from aircraft carriers trying to defend our naval fleet. So as I said, bombing of Pearl Harbor is what draws America into the war. The Pearl Harbor attack devastates our nation. This is the first time in our history that the United States as a nation is attacked. FDR creates a famous speech in which one line just stands out throughout all of history, which is, "This is a date which will live in infamy," essentially meaning a date that we will always remember, because it's the first time the United States collectively has been attacked. As a result of this day, December 8th, 1941, FDR will receive war declaration from Congress against Japan. And then eventually, since Japan are allies with Germany and Italy, they will come to the aid of their ally and eventually declare war on the United States. Japanese internment. In February 1942, FDR issues an executive order that over 100,000 Japanese Americans on the West Coast will be moved to the interior. Japanese farms and businesses are going to be sold and purchased for far less value than they're worth. So what happens here is there's a large Japanese population living in Hawaii and on the West Coast at this time. And it's the American belief that some of those Japanese Americans were actually Japanese spies that have infiltrated our nation and are giving away secrets. That's how a lot of people believe that they knew that all of our ships would be in Pearl Harbor at that date, at that certain time. So here's a picture of some of the internment camps. It was men, women, and in the bottom here, children that are being taken away and put in these internment camps as well. Allied military strategy from 1941 to 1945. The participants on the Allied powers, you have England, the Soviet Union, only after Germany cuts loose the non-aggression pact and attacks the Russians on June 22nd, 1941. France is a part of the Allies and the United States. The Axis powers are Italy, Germany, and Japan. Mobilizing for war. In 1940, economy focuses on military mobilization. There's a massive industrial output that takes place. There's twice as productive as the Germans were, and were 5 times more productive than the Japanese. Our primary focus was to create tanks, planes, and battleships to help focus this huge industrial output. A particular board is put together called the War Production Board, where their sole focus is creating more machinery, ammunition, supplies for war. We also create a military draft and draft young men that would soon be trained in the art of war and ready to fight for World War II. Here on the side is a picture of wartime propaganda, again encouraging U.S. civilians to get involved. You know, you see Hitler on the right and Japanese on the left, both of them kind of eyeing North America, saying our homes are in danger now, meaning this is no longer an across the Atlantic Ocean problem. The liberation of Europe. FDR wants to liberate Europe first and then pursue an active defense in the Pacific. The Battle of the Atlantic is Hitler's wolf packs versus the Allied navies, and our goal is to clear Germany also from North Africa. In late 1942, only Tunisia would be left under the control of the Axis powers. On the left-hand side here, you see a picture of Hitler's Desert Fox, one of his most trusted commanders in Northern Africa. Erwin Rommel is his name. Allied advances in Europe, 1943 to 1944. January 1943, the Allies would agree to fight until they win unconditional surrender. By February 1943, the Soviet Union would take back Stalingrad from the Germans, and they would move westward. At the same time, there is an Allied victory in Tunisia in northern Africa, which would secure all of northern Africa for the Allies. So here are just some pictures of, wartime deaths. This is a great picture of what cities looked like after war. These battles and fights did not take place in the wilderness or in a forest or on huge fields out in the country. They took place in cities, in people's homes, and it left Europe physically devastated, much like World War I did. Allied advancements would continue. On July 10th, 1943, Italy is invaded, and fighting continues from July 1943 to June of 1944. There are 70,000 Allied troops killed. There's a separate peace which was signed with the new Italian government in September of 1943. These people being hung upside down, stoned, beaten, these are seen as war criminals. Most of these are probably fascist Italians or fascist Germans that were found in Italy when it was retaken by the Allies. The unconditional surrender in Europe from 1944 to 1945. Britain and the U.S. Air raid strategic sites in Germany. The nickname of these air raids were the Flying Fortresses, because it was just group after group after group of airplanes just bombing German sites nonstop. On June 6, 1944 is the historic D-Day invasion and the Allied invasion of Normandy. This is the taking back of France from the Germans on the beaches. Here's a picture of that here. If you've ever seen the film Saving Private Ryan, about the first 10 minutes of that is the D-Day invasion. There's the battle at Normandy as well, which lasted from June 6th to July 24th. And on August 25th, 1944, France is liberated. Germany's last gasp effort. Hitler is caught between the Allied troops coming in from the west and Stalin's forces coming from the east. So it seems like a repeat of history. The one thing that Hitler tried to avoid by signing the non-aggression pact with the Russians, and so he wouldn't have to fight a two-front war, comes into fruition shortly after he breaks the non-aggression pact and invades the Russians. So he's now again fighting a war on two fronts, which of course he cannot win. One of the major battles at this time in December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. April 25th, 1945, Russia and the Allied forces meet at the Elbe River. May 8th, 1945, Germany surrenders. VE Day is official. VE Day means victory in Europe.